Good afternoon. Thank you for coming to this Clinical Educator Portfolio Workshop. We'll go ahead and get started, and as others come in, they'll just kind of catch up with us. The purpose of this workshop is for you to actually work on your CEPs. We'll go through a brief overview of the CV and the CEP format, what the content consists of, and then after that we will break into small groups. You each received a number when you came in, and that number indicates your group number, and we'll just stay in this room. I think we have a small enough number, and for 4 groups we'll pretty much be able to go to the 4 corners of the room to be able to discuss the CEP. And the goal is, the intent is that in the small groups you'll not only have a chance to ask questions about your own CEP, but by looking at others and hearing other participants' questions as well, will hopefully give you some additional insight into constructing your CEP as well. So Dr. Frazier will talk about the difference between the CV and the CEP, what constitutes both of those. She'll also talk a little bit about the appointments and promotions process, and then we'll move on to the small group discussion. This workshop is sponsored by the Office of Faculty Development, which Mario Castro and I co-direct, along with Jennifer Mosier, our assistant. And our mission is to provide you with resources to help foster your professional and personal development while here in the Department of Medicine. The other thing I'll point out is that the formats for both the CV and the CEP are on the Office of Faculty Development website. That's ofd.worcester.edu. If you go to that website, there's a tab across the top that says appointments and promotions, and when you click on that tab, you'll see the templates for the CV, the CEP, and there are examples there as well. In addition, this session is being taped, and we also have previous CEP workshops that have been taped and are on the website as well. So as you're working through your CEP, if you have any questions, you can go to the website and kind of fast forward to the different points in the PowerPoint presentation to answer any questions that you may have. So I'll invite Dr. Frazier to come forward, and we'll talk about the CEP and CV. And thank you for your participation.
Thanks. So this is a joke, obviously, but I think sometimes people really feel like this, that the only way they're going to get ahead is by working faster and faster. But, really, we don't want people to die. We want people to work smarter and to make sure that they get credit for all the good work that they do. So there are many tools and things that you all should be doing all the time to keep track of your activities. So one is the NIH BioSketch, and this is relevant for anybody who's doing research and who will ultimately be applying for funding. And there's a standard format for that you can find on the NIH website. But every faculty member, no matter what track you're on, should also have a CV in the WashU format. And then if you're on the Clinician Educator track, you definitely should have a Clinician Educator portfolio. Increasingly, every ad hoc and promotions committee is looking for that. They're expecting it, and if you don't have one, it's a real limitation to your portfolio review. And then I think the sooner in your career you all also just start keeping track of your other support documents, which are, again, documents that are in a standard NIH format that have to do with other grant applications that are pending or under submission, and the distribution of your activities on those other grants. And then trainee tables. Many of you will mentor young people, and every training grant will ultimately want you to be a junior or a senior mentor on their training grant. And every training grant has really complex and somewhat painful requirements to document the outcomes of the trainees. And so the sooner in your career you start keeping track of your trainees, what projects they worked on, the years they were here, whether they're an underrepresented minority or not, where they came from, where they went, and develop a system for tracking and keeping in contact with your trainees long term, the better off it will be for you, because that is not only important for training grants, but it's really important also for your CEP to keep track of who you've mentored and your commitment to teaching and mentoring. And then the pertinent records related to your teaching, your clinical care, your administrative activities, and your service are also critical. And so everything you do is probably relevant to your CV, and if it's not relevant to your CV, then maybe you should not be doing it. So I have to really caution you to think about recognizing that we want to be aware of the important things you're doing, and we want to get you credit for those things. So many times people have done extraordinary community service activity, and it's not documented anywhere. And there are honors and awards and special recognition for people who do special things in the community. And so, really think of this as your portfolio so that it can help advance your career. Now, this is also a joke also, but I think one of the things we've learned recently by doing our faculty surveys is that most people feel like they don't get enough sort of coaching, mentoring, feedback, or evaluation. And so this has to be a bi-directional thing. So if your division head is not regularly meeting with you, then you have to go to them to talk about how you're doing, are you meeting expectations for promotion, and this is what we're trying to teach everybody to do also with house staff and the medical students, is to do a better job of giving feedback, setting goals together, and then keeping track of people. So I think that we as a faculty could do a better job of this. And so mentoring is an active bidirectional process. So you have to go and engage your mentors and your division heads to show them your progress, to ask them questions, and really to set common goals, and then check in periodically to make sure that the things you're doing and the most important things that you're spending your time on are the things that are most valued by your division director, and also what are aligned with your career goals. So the way promotions and appointments happen at Washington University is in alignment with the APGAR document, and that's on the web, so if you have never read that, you probably should. So I sit down with all the division heads every year and review all of your CVs, your clinician educator portfolios, and anything else you submit to your division director. And we talk about how everybody's doing, who's excelling, who's having struggles, and what we can do to help. And for promotion, there is a portfolio that's put together that includes your CV, your clinician educator portfolio, inside and outside letters of recommendations, and manuscripts, some of your best publications. And people are evaluated on a number of different pillars of excellence: education, clinical work, and research. And people don't have to necessarily be exceptional in all three, but generally when people get promoted, they are stellar in at least 2 out of the 3. And on the clinician educator track, there's a lot more flexibility for recognition. On the tenure track, it's really about research funding, independent research productivity, because most of the people on the tenure track are really doing 80% research, whereas on the clinician educator track, people are doing lots of different things in different proportions. And so how your packet looks really has to reflect how you spend your time. So we have an internal committee within the Department of Medicine that reviews faculty for promotion. There's a discussion between me and the division head, and then the portfolio is reviewed by the division heads within the department. If they approve and everybody agrees that the person is a suitable candidate for promotion, then it goes to the ad hoc committee. And the ad hoc committee includes 5 to 7 chairmen and 2 to 4 senior faculty members. No one is from the Department of Medicine except me that's there, and I go 5 times a year to do this, and we have a booklet that's about this thick with about 40 faculty members, because that's what all our appointments and promotions go through. So I talk about every faculty member in the book. They ask me questions, and then I leave, and they discuss, whether it's appropriate for promotion. So it is critical that your portfolio really represents everything that you do, so that people who are not in your subspecialty also understand it. And then, after it's approved by the ad hoc committee, then it's approved by the executive faculty, which are all the chairmen, and then ultimately those that are tenure decisions and senior promotions go to the Washington University Board for review. And this is basically the timeline. This is not a fast process. So it's important for people to understand that just recommending you for promotion doesn't mean that you're promoted tomorrow. The process, getting the packet together, getting it through all these committees, takes 6 to 9 months at its fastest. And usually the slowest part is getting the packet all together, and often the faculty member is kind of a slow part of the process, because they can't do anything until they really have your CV and your CEP in good shape. And then there are all these, terrible timelines and requirements for how much advance notice each part of the process has to have, which is why it takes so long. So I wish I could tell you that every packet I get is perfect and then I can run it through it. But most of the packets I get have to go back to the division 3 or 4 times before they look appropriate to go through the committees. And that's because either the CV is not professionally done, it has typos, it's in wrong order, or people haven't, carefully proofed it, or it really just doesn't have everything that I know they already do. The same thing for the CEP. So we will send them back and back and back, but after the second send back, I get kind of crabby. And then you don't want me to be crabby when I'm trying to advocate for you. So the more you can do to make this actually come perfect the first time, the better it is for you. So for the CVs, it really reflects the traditional academic areas of research, grants, publications. I think this has been a problem for people who don't do a lot of research because they don't know what to put on their CV. And so that's why the CEP was developed, to really have another document that helps really track your productivity in these other very important and meaningful areas. So the standard formats for the CV are on a number of websites. You can look at those. They're also on our Office of Faculty Development website, and on that site there are some really good examples. And I would say that the most common errors on the CV are people sort of flip-flopping if they're going from oldest to most recent, and oldest to most recent is the appropriate order that people like to read these in. If they have missing dates or things that are undocumented in terms of when they did their educational aspects, when they did their house staff training, and if there's any missing years, accounting for those years, and making sure that you show the start dates and the end dates for everything so that people can see where you spent your time and how you spent your time. So, the beginning is just the demographic stuff. You really need to think about what you want to put in the demographic stuff. You don't need to put your children's birth dates and your children's names. Sometimes people still do that. You should not put your Social Security number, and I get that still on there. And you don't have to have your home phone number on there, so it kind of depends. Your CV becomes a public document and often gets forwarded to lots of different places because, that's what it's supposed to be for. So if there's private stuff that you don't want all over the universe, your cell phone number, your home address, don't put it on your CV. Just have your work address and your work contact information. And, generally one email address, not 47 different choices of email addresses, and certainly not the funny email addresses or your Facebook pages with, sort of terrible names. I'm telling you this because I've seen this on CVs that have been sent. So it generally starts, with your present position, then your educational background, and then house staff training and jobs that you've had. Then appointments and committees, military service if you have it, and then honors and awards, again from oldest to youngest, and then, these are sort of the basic things. It's pretty standard. If you don't have things in those areas, then that's okay. You leave it blank. But it's something to think about in terms of your career development and networking, how you can actually get engaged in activities that would be relevant to academic promotion. And then your research support, again, your role in the grant, the title of the grant, the dates of the grant, your percent effort, but not the dollar amount anymore, though, it's certainly okay if you have it in there. But you need to make sure that you document the grants correctly. So what looks really terrible is if people list grants and make it seem as if they're the PI or they're a site investigator when they are not. So make sure you are quite honest about your role and responsibility. So I'll just give you a small bad example, but the KL2 award is a career development award that goes to the trainee. It doesn't go to the mentor, and it's really an institutional grant. So only the trainee should have that listed. But I've seen faculty members list the KL2 of their trainees, which is completely wrong. And I've also seen people list things for multi-center studies as if they're the PI or they're the co-PI when really they're the site PI. So I think you need to make sure that that's done carefully, because looking fraudulent, even if it's accidental, is really terrible. And then your patents, clinical titles, responsibilities, teaching titles, and then bibliography. This should be pretty straightforward, but often it's not. Sometimes people have their citations that are non-standard, incorrect. I think you should bold your name, and if your name has changed, you need to put that on there somewhere with an asterisk so people can track your old name and your new name and have them both bolded, because sometimes people can't keep track of that. And then any other invited publications or non-traditional publications. You should not put things you're thinking about writing, things that are almost finished, things that you haven't started. And sometimes that is excessive. When you're very young, I understand the urge to do that, and in some settings it may be okay. If you have, if you have papers pending in press, then you should put the journal and that it's accepted in press and the date. But, what people worry about when you put things that are in process is that the process is highly variable, right? It might be a wink and a nod. It might have been a dream you had last night, or something you were thinking about, but it might be something you've been thinking about for 5 years and really is never going to come out. So that's why generally people don't get very excited about the stuff that's in press. Bill, sorry.
Can I just make one comment that WashU doesn't include abstracts when you come in this, because particularly at all the junior faculty will put in abstracts of meeting, when they had an abstract at a meeting, and that is not, you can put that in the CEP, but it does not go in this.
And I think for young people, it is good to keep track of your abstracts, because you're going to have abstracts before you have papers, but that's not going to go on your NIH BioSketch, and it's not going to go in the CV. And if you're really on target, every abstract should become a paper. And if it's not, then it shouldn't be an abstract. So, I think you have to have a one-to-one correlation there, because that's a good use of your time. So, Angela, do you want to do the Clinician Educator portfolio, or you want me to keep powering through? So the Clinician Educator portfolio is really a wonderful thing, and we lifted this from pediatrics because pediatrics has done an extraordinary job with their office, and there's Bess in the background who helped us do this with really trying to keep track of all of the wonderful things that people do in the area of scholarship that's more broadly defined than what's on a CV. So this should be a supplement to your CV, should not be redundant. You shouldn't have things in exactly the same place, duplicated, but it really should go into more descriptive detail about your scholarship, your clinical activities, your educational activities, your community service, these non-traditional things, and it really helps people a lot understand what you do. And when it's done well, the ad hoc committees are just blown away by it. So it's really wonderful. And I think if you do both your CV and the CEP in sort of a real time, that it's aligned with your career development plan, I don't think you can probably update it like every minute, every day, but if you update each of these once or twice a year, that would be fabulous. And if you set up a tracking system in your calendar or something so that then you can update it, that would be really wonderful. And generally, people have sort of a mission statement in the beginning in terms of what are you focusing your career on? What's your niche? What's most important to you? What do you want to be known for that is outstanding? And this can be in research, it can be as a clinician educator, it can be in community service, it can be in safety and quality. There's a number of areas. And then there's also an opportunity really to put your career goals and objectives on here, so hopefully they're completely aligned with your career development plan. And then, where you're going, so that every time you sit with your division head and your mentors, you can say, well, am I on target or not? I thought I'd have 2 papers a year, or I thought I'd have this book chapter done, or I thought I'd, be finished with my master's degree or become a master teacher. And here are some examples also. So again, there's kind of 3 major parts of this: clinical, educational, community service, but it could be administrative as well in terms of, what you spend your time on. And we really want, nice, terse, I'm not looking for pages and pages for each thing, but good descriptions of what that activity is, how many hours, how many people it touched, what came out of it, why it's important, so that all these people who are not internal medicine people, if there are pediatricians in the room, they usually get it if they're a neurologist, but often there are people who have no clue what you do, and so this is really very helpful. So talk about the location, the kind of service, how many weeks on service, how many patients you care for, and what your role and responsibility is on those clinical activities. And anything special that you do in terms of either subspecialty programs, volumes, and this should be an ongoing thing. Now, you don't have to repeat it for every year, so if it's pretty much the same every year, you can put it started in 2005 to the present. But you should be able to show if things grew or expanded, what the contributions were over time. So here's kind of a direct head-to-head comparison. In a CV, you might say under clinical title that you're an internal medicine attending, and that's kind of it. Whereas in the CEP, we want this broader description of what it really means. It's a big job. It's critically important. You're supervising lots of residents, lots of medical students, lots of very sick patients. It takes, 10, 12, sometimes 20 hours a day. So that's what people are looking for. But you're not doing this giant description in the CV. Okay, so you got a one-liner in your CV and you have a better description in your CEP. So here's another example. The same sort of description. And people do this in different ways, but I think you can write it as a text, as a brief paragraph, or you can do it as bullets. But it should be clear, it should be concise. The goal is not to kill a billion trees. The goal is to help them understand what you really do and how important it is. So here's another example for a renal fellows clinic, and what they did as the director of the renal fellows clinic. So here's an example for quality improvement. Many people who do a lot of clinical activities really focus on patient safety, quality, efficiency. And so describe what you did, what was bad before, how you improved it, whether you developed a guideline, a care path, order sets, and who all you worked with, that it was multidisciplinary. And be honest about your role in the team. If you were the leader, say you were the leader. If you were, critically important to the process, and make sure that you're not taking credit for something only yourself if it really was a team of people. So credit the team as well. So this is just an example for renal, for developing renal replacement therapy, standardized order sets, an educational program to improve safety and quality around patients getting renal replacement therapy. So, and here's just another example of how people described what their unique activities were related to improving the safety of handoffs and communication between attendings, house staff, medical students, and their interface with the electronic health record. So lots of ways to do this, and so I don't really want people just copying off the templates, though you can learn from them, but put yourself in it so it's clear. sounds like you, looks like you. There's an example for carepaths. Other clinical guidelines for asthma or for head injury. There's lots of things like this that you guys all have done probably, and you never wrote down that you did it. So for clinical trials, this is a place where you would list, and people often do this on their CV as well, so just pick if you're putting it in one place or another, but don't double dip. List the trial name, your role in the trial, and either the number of patients enrolled or publications that came out of it. And then administrative activities, many of you will have administrative activities. So if you're a medical director for a clinic or a training program or a fellowship program, that's a huge amount of work. And often people outside the field don't understand unless you describe, the roles and responsibilities. And these kinds of activities, as you're doing them or becoming engaged, think about these are potentially people who are going to write letters for you also. And so that can be part of your networking and your development. So here's another example of what would be in a CV versus what would be in the CEP. Again, just a broader description of the role, the responsibilities, the activities, and what came out of it. So the thing we're seeing now is that people are putting all their publications in the CV and the CEP. You need to put it in one place or another, and if you have publications, I would put them in your CV and not in your CEP, so you can, refer back to your CV. But this is often a place where people put their non-traditional publications, if they have online publications, if they have blogs, if they have lay press information. This kind of stuff, this really interesting multimedia DVD that was developed for bereavement, and again, just sort of bold your name so it's clear. And the same thing for case reports and reviews, one place or another, but not both. I think all these publications, unless they're very non-traditional, should be in your CV. And then there's a very clear guidelines for if you have patents, how those should be documented. And again, those should be in your CV. But in the CEP, you could describe, I developed the dog heartworm, test. It's made, substantial improvements in the morbidity and mortality of dogs. It's used all over the world, blah, blah, blah. Because in the CV, you really just have the thing that you developed, the IP and the number, and not a big description of what it was. So this feedback area is probably an area where people go a little hog wild. So I've had people send in CEPs where they've just copied all of their student and house staff evaluations for like 10 years and attached it. That is not what we're looking for here. And also, we're not looking for you to get all your reviews and then highlight all the wonderful comments and copy them on here also, because that's obviously conflicted, right? Because you could put all the happy, wonderful comments and none of the sort of negative ones. So what people are looking for are either have someone else write a letter, which is really the best, about your student or your resident evaluations so that they can talk about you and all the information that's in there, or have general aggregate data about your scores on your evaluations. And then didactic teaching sessions, again, often people are like, well, I give the same talk, I've given it for 100 years, and so they list it once. But generally people don't get exactly the same talk over and over again. So you should keep track of every talk that you give and where you gave it, who the audience was, and if it was invited, and what the topic was. So again, here's kind of an example of the difference between what's in a CV and what's in a CEP for if you're the course master for an elective, a selective, or a big pathophysiology course. So this is not, rocket science. The same thing, here's another example. And the same for if you develop a new course or a new elective, you describe, what it is and how many people took it and how successful it's been. So the same thing with describing if you develop handouts, curriculum, enduring materials that people use. Those are really valuable things, and you may be doing this a lot and just never writing it down. So specifically for curriculum, that is a huge amount of time and effort. So you got to make sure that you really describe what went into it and how it's being used. Here's sort of an example of the ambulatory care experience curriculum, which, obviously has lots of students that participate in a very complex organizational structure. So this can work for simulation. It can work for educational interventions where you're testing, what's the best cognitive learning theory. And the mentoring part, when you describe, you should have a list of all the people that you were a mentor for and what project they worked on and when the time frame was, so that people can see you're playing an important role there. What should not be on there is if you just have like a student shadow you for an hour in clinic, or that sort of doesn't really excite anybody. But I think if you routinely have people shadow you over and over and over again, then that's something else. So here's an example of mentorship in terms of people working in the faculty advisory program or in the academic medical women's network or the cardiology fellows research program. Here's an example for what you could do if you participate in CME. These slides will all be available. And then honors and awards. I think this is another area where people often undervalue themselves. So it's not the goal just to write the name of the award and the date. If you put a little description of what the award is for, it is way more meaningful to people so they can understand the value of that honor and award. So lay literature, again, that goes on there. And then participation in committees. Describe your role, responsibilities. Obviously, it's better if you can get a leadership role and be a chairman of the committee or a vice chairman. And then your role in local, regional, national committees. And then anything you do with the media is really relevant. Some people step up to the plate and, are so willing to go on the news and answer the tough questions. And, for many of us, it's like the pain of your life. And so doing that is really very important to represent the school, the hospitals, and the institution. So, the community service is broadly defined. So it's community service to the hospital, community service to the institution, and community service, it may be religious, it may be volunteer activities. And these are very important as well. And people do get recognized for these in their clinician educator portfolio. So again, give the dates, the description, your roles, responsibility. And then if you do other stuff that does not fit under one of these other categories that's relevant, I'm not sure that if you're a volunteer clown at the rodeo, that would probably be good to put in here. But if you're a volunteer clown at Children's Hospital and you go, 5 times a year and you're volunteering in hospitals or teaching sexually transmitted diseases in middle schools, you should put that on here. So there are the links for sort of these basic documents that you should read and should look at as you start drilling through this. But now, hopefully, did you all bring your CEPs or your CVs with you? Is that a yes? Good. So let's break into the 4 groups because we have wonderful faculty volunteers who've done this a lot, who've been on ad hoc committees, and who have been very supportive of getting people promoted. So